At the heart of the seemingly perfect community lived the Harper family. John and Diane Harper were well-respected members of Willow Creek, known for their strict but loving parenting style. John, a hard-working accountant, spent his days buried in financial reports, while Diane, a former schoolteacher, now dedicated her time to raising their two children, 17-year-old Ethan and 14-year-old Lily. The Harpers were the kind of family people admired. They attended church every Sunday, hosted neighborhood barbecues, and made sure their kids were involved in school activities. From the outside, their lives seemed perfect. But behind the closed doors of their immaculate home, tension had been brewing for months. Ethan, once a bright and promising student, had changed. He was no longer the cheerful, obedient son his parents had raised. Instead, he had become withdrawn, moody, and defiant. He stayed out late, ignored his parents' rules, and most concerning of all, he had started seeing a girl his parents strongly disapproved of. Her name was Madison Reeves. Madison was everything the Harpers didn't want for their son. She had a reputation, a girl from the wrong side of town, raised by a single mother with a history of run-ins with the law. She had been suspended from school multiple times for fighting, skipping classes, and allegedly dealing with things no respectable family wanted their children exposed to. John and Diane had forbidden Ethan from seeing her, but that only made him want her more. "She understands me," Ethan would argue whenever his parents confronted him. "She doesn't judge me like you do." No amount of scolding or grounding seemed to change his behavior. If anything, it only pushed him further away. Lily, Ethan's younger sister, watched her family unravel in silence. She adored her brother but couldn't understand why he had become so angry, so different. Their home, once filled with laughter and warmth, now felt like a battleground. It was a chilly autumn night when the Harper family sat down for what would be their last dinner together. The air was thick with unspoken tension. Ethan barely touched his food, scrolling through his phone with an indifferent expression. Diane sighed, trying to reach him. "Ethan, honey, how was school today?" He didn't look up. "Fine." John set down his fork, his patience wearing thin. "You were late coming home again. Where were you?" Ethan smirked. "Out. With Madison?" John pressed, his voice tight with frustration. Ethan met his father's glare. "Yeah. And?" Diane placed a hand on John's arm, trying to calm him, but it was too late. "I told you to stay away from that girl," John snapped. "She's trouble, Ethan. She's dragging you down with her." Ethan chuckled darkly, shaking his head. "You don't know anything about her." "I know enough," John shot back. "And I know that if you keep going down this path, you're going to ruin your future." Ethan pushed his chair back abruptly. "Maybe I don't want the future you planned for me." Lily flinched at her brother's raised voice, her eyes darting between her parents and Ethan. She had never seen him this angry before. Diane's voice was soft but firm. "Ethan, we're not trying to control you. We just want what's best for you." Ethan let out a bitter laugh. "No, you want what's best for you. You don't care what I want." John's hands clenched into fists. "You're acting like a spoiled child." Ethan's eyes darkened. "Maybe that's because you treat me like one." With that, he stormed away from the table, his footsteps echoing through the house as he disappeared into his room. The slam of his door was the final blow to the fragile peace that once held their family together. John exhaled sharply, running a hand through his graying hair. "That boy is out of control." Diane sighed, her eyes filled with worry. "He's just a teenager, John. He'll grow out of it." John wasn't so sure. There was something different about Ethan lately, something dangerous lurking beneath the surface. Lily poked at her food, whispering, "He's changed." Diane reached over and squeezed her daughter's hand, offering a reassuring smile. "It's just a phase, sweetheart." But deep down, she wasn't convinced. And within the next 24 hours, her worst fears would come true. The moon hung high over Willow Creek, casting long shadows across the Harper household. Inside, the house was eerily silent. John and Diane had retreated to their bedroom, exhausted from yet another argument with Ethan. Lily, still shaken from dinner, lay awake in her room, listening to the muffled sounds of her brother moving around upstairs. Ethan was anything but asleep. He sat on the edge of his bed, his mind racing. His parents didn't understand him. They never had. They saw Madison as some kind of disease, someone who would ruin his life. But in reality, she was the only person who truly saw him, and he would do anything to be with her. Grabbing his phone, Ethan typed out a message. Ethan, they're trying to keep us apart again. I can't take it anymore. A few seconds later, Madison replied. Madison, then don't. Sneak me in. Let's be together. Ethan's heart pounded. He knew it was reckless, but at that moment he didn't care. He had already lost his family in every way that mattered. The only person left was Madison. He crept to his window and slid it open. The cool night air brushed against his skin as he climbed down the trellis and landed quietly on the grass. His parents would kill him if they found out, but he had stopped fearing their punishments long ago. Madison was waiting for him a block away, leaning against a lamppost, her dark hoodie pulled over her head. She grinned as he approached. Took you long enough, she whispered. Ethan pulled her into a kiss. I don't care anymore. They can't control me. Madison smirked. Then prove it. The two of them hurried back to the house, Ethan making sure to avoid the front door security cameras. He guided Madison toward the basement entrance, the one place in the house where they could be alone without fear of getting caught. As they settled in, Madison ran her fingers through his hair. You ever think about just running away? Ethan exhaled, shaking his head. Where would we go? Anywhere but here. Ethan rested his forehead against hers. I just want to be with you. Madison kissed him. Then stop letting them control you. Do something about it. Ethan stiffened. Like what? Madison shrugged. I don't know. Just stop letting them tell you how to live. If they won't accept us, make them. There was something in her tone, something dark and persuasive. Ethan didn't respond right away. He just pulled her closer, unaware that upstairs, the house was beginning to stir. John Harper had woken up, and the night was about to take a horrifying turn. The clock on the nightstand read 2:13 a.m. when John Harper stirred in his sleep. Something felt off. It wasn't a noise, nor was it a nightmare. It was just an unease in his gut that refused to let him rest. Rolling over, he glanced at Diane, who was still sound asleep. He sighed, rubbing his face before getting up to grab a glass of water from the kitchen. As he walked down the dimly lit hallway, he noticed something unusual. The basement light was on. John frowned. Why would the basement light be on this late? Curiosity turned into suspicion. He moved quietly, his footsteps light against the hardwood floor. Something in his gut told him he wasn't going to like what he found. The basement door was slightly ajar. John pushed it open slowly, peering inside. His eyes adjusted to the dim light, and then, his breath caught in his throat. There, tangled up on the old couch, were Ethan and Madison. The way they were positioned, half-dressed, wrapped in each other, made John's stomach turn. His son, the boy he had raised with discipline and love, was defying him in the worst way possible. Ethan's head snapped up, his eyes wide with shock. Madison let out a small gasp, scrambling to pull a blanket over herself. John's voice was ice cold. What the hell is going on here? Ethan swallowed hard, his entire body stiff with panic. He had been caught. There was no way out of this. But his father wasn't just angry. He looked disgusted. John stepped fully into the basement, his presence towering over them. Get up. Both of you. Madison clung to Ethan, her face turning red. It's not what you think, Mr. Harper. John's face twisted with rage. Shut your mouth. You have no right to be in my home. Get dressed and get out. Ethan stood up, his fists clenched. Dad. Just listen. No. You listen to me. John bellowed. I've had enough of this. You think you're a man now? Sneaking girls into my house? Breaking every rule we set? This is over. Do you hear me? Over. Ethan's jaw tensed. You can't control who I love. John took a step closer. She is poison, Ethan. And if you think I'm going to let you throw your life away on some, don't say it. Ethan's voice was low, dangerous. John scoffed. You're pathetic. Just like her. That was it. The final blow. Something inside Ethan snapped. Shut up, Ethan whispered. His hands trembled. His heart pounded. Every insult, every restriction, every moment of feeling trapped. It all boiled over. John pointed a finger at him. You're done seeing her. And if you disobey me one more time, I swear to God, Ethan. Bang. A single, deafening gunshot shattered the silence of the basement. John Harper stumbled backward, his eyes wide with shock. He looked down, his hands pressing against his stomach where blood was already soaking through his shirt. Ethan had never held a real gun before that night. His father, John, had always kept a 9mm pistol locked in a safe in their bedroom closet. It was meant for home protection, never to be used, only there just in case. But Ethan knew where John kept the key. Ethan stood there, breathing heavily, the smoking gun in his hand. Madison's eyes went wide. Ethan, what did you just do? John collapsed to the floor, gasping, choking on his own blood. And upstairs, Diane and Lily had woken up. The nightmare had only just begun. The gunshot echoed through the Harper house like a thunderclap, shattering the silence of the early morning. Upstairs, Diane jolted awake, her heart pounding. For a moment, she thought she had imagined it. But then, Mom! Lily's terrified scream pierced the air. Diane scrambled out of bed, her mind racing. Was that a gunshot? No, it couldn't be. But then she heard something even more chilling. A low, gurgling sound. John. Diane rushed toward the basement stairs, her pulse hammering in her ears. Lily followed close behind, her small hands trembling as she clutched the railing. As they descended, Diane's breath caught in her throat. There, sprawled on the basement floor, was her husband. Blood pooled beneath him, his body twitching as he struggled to breathe. His eyes, wide with shock, locked onto hers. And standing over him was Ethan, their son, holding a gun. Diane's knees nearly buckled. Oh my God! Ethan, what did you do? Ethan stood frozen, his chest rising and falling rapidly. His face was pale, his hands still gripping the weapon as if he couldn't believe what had just happened. Madison was beside him, equally stunned, her hands covering her mouth. John let out a weak cough, blood bubbling at his lips. His trembling hand reached toward Diane as if begging for help. Diane rushed forward, falling to her knees beside her husband. She pressed her hands against his wound, desperate to stop the bleeding. Stay with me, John. Just hold on. Lily, barely able to comprehend what she was seeing, whimpered behind her mother. Ethan, why? Ethan's eyes flickered to his little sister. Something inside him wavered just for a moment. But Madison grabbed his arm. Ethan, we have to go. Now. Ethan's hands shook as reality came crashing down. There was no undoing what he had just done. His father wasn't going to recover. His mother and sister would never forgive him. His only way out was to finish what he had started. His grip tightened around the gun. Diane saw it in his eyes, the shift, the moment her son changed forever. Ethan, please don't. Her voice cracked with desperation. But Ethan had already made his decision. His finger slid back onto the trigger. The basement air was thick with the metallic scent of blood. Diane's hands trembled as she pressed down on John's wound, her mind screaming at her to do something, to stop this. But she couldn't move. Not with Ethan standing over them, gripping the gun like it was the only thing keeping him upright. Lily sobbed behind her, her small body shaking as she clung to the railing. And then, Ethan, Diane whispered, you don't have to do this. Please, just put the gun down. But Ethan's face was unreadable now. There was no more fear, no more hesitation, only cold determination. Madison's hand tightened around his wrist. We don't have time for this. You know what has to happen. Diane's breath hitched. What do you mean, what has to happen? Madison turned her sharp gaze toward her. You're going to call the cops, aren't you? You and your daughter. Lily whimpered. Mom. Diane's heart pounded. Ethan, no, please. We can fix this. But Ethan just shook his head. There's no fixing this, Mom. His voice was eerily calm. John let out a rattling breath, his body twitching as his life slipped away. Son. He could barely get the word out. Ethan took a slow step forward, raising the gun. No! Diane screamed, throwing herself over her husband's body. Madison hissed, Ethan, just shoot her. Do it before she calls the cops. His hands shook. His mother, his little sister. Could he really do this? Could he really pull the trigger? Lily saw her chance. While Ethan was frozen, caught in the weight of what he was about to do, she bolted. Scrambling up the basement stairs, she ran faster than she ever had before, her bare feet slamming against the wooden steps. "Lily!" Ethan shouted, snapping out of his trance. Panic surged through him. If she made it outside, if she got to the neighbors, it was all over. He lunged forward, racing after her. "Go get her!" Madison screamed. Diane, realizing what was happening, grabbed Ethan's leg. "No! Let her go!" Ethan kicked her off, sending his mother sprawling backward. And then he took off after Lily. Diane gasped for breath, watching her son chase his little sister through the darkened house. And that's when she knew. Her son was going to kill them all. Lily's bare feet pounded against the hardwood floor as she sprinted through the darkened house, her heart hammering against her ribs. She could hear Ethan behind her, his heavy footsteps, his ragged breathing, closing in fast. She had no plan, no time to think. Just run. Get out. Get help. She tore through the kitchen, aiming for the back door. Her fingers fumbled with the lock, but just as she wrenched it open, a hand grabbed her wrist. "No!" Lily screamed, twisting and kicking wildly. Ethan yanked her back into the house and slammed the door shut. "Stop fighting me," he growled. Lily thrashed, sobbing. "Please, Ethan, don't do this. Please." His grip was vice-like, but there was hesitation in his eyes. A flicker of something, remorse? Doubt? But then Madison appeared in the hallway, panting. "What the hell are you waiting for? Do it!" Ethan swallowed hard. His little sister looked so small, so fragile. He didn't want to hurt her. He just wanted her to stop running. But Madison's voice cut through his hesitation. "She's a problem, Ethan. She's going to ruin everything." Lily sobbed. "Mom and Dad love you. I love you. Please, Ethan, this isn't you." Ethan's grip faltered for just a second, and that's when Diane came crashing into him from behind. Diane slammed into Ethan with all the strength she had, forcing him off Lily. The gun clattered to the floor, skidding under the dining table. "Run, Lily. Now!" Diane shrieked. Lily didn't hesitate. She bolted for the stairs, her sobs echoing through the house. Diane turned back to Ethan, her hands trembling as she pushed him against the wall. "What is wrong with you? You just shot your father. You're chasing your own sister. This is madness." Ethan's breathing was ragged, his eyes wild. "You were never on my side." Madison rushed forward, shoving Diane back. "Ethan, get the gun." Diane scrambled to reach it first, diving onto the floor. Her fingers brushed against the cold metal, but Madison kicked her in the ribs, sending her sprawling. "I've had enough of this." Madison seethed, grabbing the gun and pointing it at Diane. Ethan froze. "Maddie, what are you doing?" Madison's eyes were dark, filled with something almost inhuman. She cocked the gun, aiming at Diane's head. "Finishing what you won't." Ethan stared at Madison. This wasn't what he wanted. Not like this. Not his mother. Not Lily. Everything had spiraled out of control. Diane looked up at her son, tears streaming down her face. "Ethan, please. You can still stop this." For the first time, Ethan saw it. The fear in his mother's eyes. The same fear his father had felt before he pulled the trigger. And suddenly, the weight of it all crashed down on him. His hands clenched into fists. His breath came in short gasps. Madison pressed the barrel against Diane's forehead. "Say goodnight, Mommy." And then, Ethan moved. Ethan lunged forward. Before Madison could pull the trigger, he grabbed her wrist and wrenched the gun away. The shot went off, a deafening crack, but the bullet lodged harmlessly into the ceiling. Diane screamed and scrambled backward as Ethan wrestled with Madison. She clawed at his arms, kicking wildly, but Ethan overpowered her. "Let go of me," Madison shrieked, thrashing in his grip. Ethan's chest heaved, his mind racing. What have I done? What am I doing? His father was bleeding out in the basement. His mother and sister were terrified of him. Madison, the girl he thought he loved, was willing to kill without a second thought. This wasn't how it was supposed to go, but it was too late to undo any of it. Diane, still gasping for breath, crawled to her feet. Her eyes flickered between Ethan and Madison, her hands trembling. "Ethan, listen to me." Her voice was desperate but steady. You have a choice. Right now. You can stop this. Put the gun down. Madison's eyes flashed with fury. Don't listen to her, she hissed. She's turning you against me. Ethan's hands shook. He gripped the gun so tightly his knuckles turned white. His mother, his girlfriend, one telling him to stop, one telling him to finish it. And then, from upstairs, police, drop your weapon. Red and blue lights flooded through the windows, casting eerie shadows across the walls. Lily, she had made it. She had gotten help. Ethan's breath came in short gasps. He could hear footsteps storming up the porch. The front door burst open. Madison's face twisted into something ugly. You hesitated, she whispered. You were supposed to be stronger than this. Ethan's world slowed. The gun was still in his hands. The cops were here. There was no way out. Drop it. Now. A voice boomed from the doorway. Ethan's eyes darted between his mother, Madison, and the officers raising their weapons at him. His mind screamed. And then, he made his choice. Ethan's hands shook as he stared down at the gun. The voices around him blurred. Drop it. The officers shouted again. Madison glared at him. Do something. Diane sobbed. Ethan, please. His body felt frozen. Then he let the gun fall, clattered to the floor. In an instant, officers swarmed in, tackling him and Madison. Handcuffs clicked around his wrists. Madison screamed, thrashing. He did it. It was all him, but it was over. John Harper was rushed to the hospital but didn't survive. Diane and Lily were left to pick up the shattered pieces of their family. Ethan was charged with murder, attempted murder, and assault with a deadly weapon. Madison, despite her attempts to manipulate the situation, was charged as an accomplice. Ethan sat in his cold, gray cell, replaying the night over and over. How did it come to this? His family was gone. His future was gone. Madison had vanished into the prison system. And all for what? A reckless moment. Terrible choice. Now all he had left were the walls around him, and the endless, suffocating regret.